Sarah Martinez's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter, her bank account showing just $47. The woman standing before her, dripping in diamonds, designer handbag tossed carelessly on the glass display, was berating an elderly customer for counting out coins too slowly. Some of us have real jobs to get to. The woman's voice cut through a quiet flower shop like a blade. Sarah had worked at Bloom & Petal for 3 years. She'd smiled through countless difficult moments, served hundreds of customers with patience and grace. But watching this woman mock, someone's grandmother made something inside her snap. "Ma'am," Sarah's voice came out steady, professional, but unmistakably firm. "You need to leave. Now." The shop fell into stunned silence. The wealthy woman's mouth dropped open in shock. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Adriana Westfield like that. What Sarah didn't know was that the quiet man browsing orchids in the corner wasn't just another customer. He was Marcus Chun, CEO of Chun Luxury Holdings, worth $340 million, and he was in her shop for one very specific reason. His mother had told him about a florist who treated strangers like family. He came to see if it was true, and what happened next would either destroy Sarah's career completely or give her a life she never imagined possible. Before we continue with Sarah's incredible journey, if you believe in standing up for what's right even when it costs everything, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Chen's mother had visited a small flower shop tucked between a laundromat and a family-owned diner. The florist there had done something remarkable. She remembered Mrs. Chen's late husband's favorite flowers, white orchids, without being asked. She'd spent 20 minutes helping her choose the perfect arrangement, refusing to rush despite a line forming behind them. When Mrs. Chen returned home, she told her son something that would change everything. "That girl has something your executives don't. Heart." Today, Marcus came to see for himself. Sarah Martinez moved through Bloom and Petal with the gentle efficiency of someone who genuinely loved their work. She arranged roses with artistic care, her fingers knowing exactly how each stem should fall. When customers entered, she didn't just see transactions, she saw stories. The nervous young man buying his first anniversary bouquet. The middle-aged woman selecting flowers for her mother's hospital room. Sarah remembered their names, their preferences, the small details that made people feel seen. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A bank alert. $47. Sarah sighed quietly, pushing the worry aside. Her landlord had just raised the rent again, and she had 10 days to figure out how to cover the difference. But she couldn't think about that now, not with customers waiting. Marcus Chin stood in the corner of the shop, partially hidden behind a towering display of orchids. To anyone watching, he appeared to be simply browsing, occasionally leaning in to examine a particular bloom. But his eyes kept drifting back to the woman behind the counter. He watched how she touched each arrangement with reverence, how her face lit up when explaining the meaning behind different flowers to curious customers. An elderly woman entered, moving slowly with careful, deliberate steps. Mrs. Patterson had been coming to this shop for years, and Sarah's face brightened immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, how lovely to see you. Are we celebrating something special today?" The elderly woman smiled softly. "Just wanted some daisies for my kitchen table. They always made my Henry smile." Her hand shook slightly as she opened her small coin purse, beginning to count out the payment with painstaking care. Sarah watched with infinite patience, not a trace of impatience or judgment crossing her features. "Take your time, sweetheart. There's no rush at all." She leaned forward slightly. "And you know what? These daisies are absolutely perfect. Your Henry had excellent taste." Marcus observed this interaction with growing interest, taking mental notes. This was exactly what his mother had described. Genuine kindness extended without calculation, without expectation of reward. Sarah didn't know Mrs. Patterson had any connection to him. She was simply being herself. Then the shop door opened again, and the energy in the room shifted immediately. Adriana Westfield entered Bloom and Petal, like a storm sweeping into calm waters. Her designer coat hung perfectly from her shoulders. Her Hermes bag swung carelessly from one arm, and her presence demanded immediate attention. She didn't walk to the counter. She commanded it, her heels clicking sharply against the worn wooden floors. Mrs. Patterson was still at the register, carefully counting out her coins with trembling fingers. She'd lost count twice and had to start over, apologizing softly each time. Sarah stood across from her, completely unbothered, offering quiet reassurance. "You're doing just fine, Mrs. Patterson. No worries at all." Adriana positioned herself directly behind the elderly woman, close enough to make her presence unmistakably felt. She began tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the glass countertop, sharp, rhythmic, deliberately impatient clicks that echoed through the small space. Sarah glanced up, acknowledging the new customer with a polite smile. "I'll be right with you, ma'am." Adriana's eyes narrowed. The tapping grew louder. Mrs. Patterson's hands began to shake more noticeably. Several coins slipped from her fingers, scattering across the counter. "Oh, dear, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking with embarrassment. "Seriously?" Adriana's voice cut through the shop like a knife. "Some of us have actual appointments to get to." The other customers in the shop went quiet, pretending to examine flowers while tension filled the air. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained gentle as she addressed Mrs. Patterson. "You're absolutely fine. Here, let me help you gather these." But Adriana wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe you should shop somewhere more appropriate for your budget, like a grocery store. They have flowers, too." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed deep red. Her hands began shaking so badly that more coins tumbled to the floor. Sarah watched the elderly woman's eyes fill with tears, and something inside her crystallized into cold, hard resolve. Sarah straightened slowly, setting down the coins she'd been collecting. When she looked at Adriana, her expression was perfectly professional, but her voice carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "Ma'am, everyone who enters a shop deserves respect. I'm going to need you to please be patient." Adriana's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Excuse me? Do you have any idea who I am?" Sarah met her gaze without flinching. "I know you're being unkind to someone who deserves better. That's all that matters right now." The shop fell into absolute silence. Even the street noise outside seemed to fade away. Other customers stood frozen, witnessing something they'd never expected to see, a minimum wage worker standing up to obvious wealth and power. Adriana's face transformed, shock giving way to fury. "I'll have you fired. My husband is Councilman Westfield. One phone call, and you'll never work in the city again." Sarah's hands were shaking now, but not with fear, with righteous anger held barely in check. She placed both palms flat on the counter, leaning forward slightly. "Then I'm sure he'd be very proud to know his wife belittles elderly people in public. You need to leave. Now!" The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Adriana's face flushed crimson. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Then she found her voice low and venomous. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, little girl." She snatched her handbag from the counter and stormed toward the door, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. At the threshold, she turned back, pointing one manicured finger at Sarah. "You have no idea what you've just done." The door slammed behind her with enough force to make the small bell above it ring frantically. The silence that followed Adriana's departure felt thick and heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Sarah stood frozen at the counter, her hands still pressed flat against the glass, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The reality of what she'd just done was beginning to sink in, and with it came a wave of cold dread that made her stomach turn. Mrs. Patterson stood trembling, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Sarah immediately shifted her focus, moving around the counter to gently guide the elderly woman to a nearby chair. "Please, sit down for a moment. Let me get you some water." "You didn't have to do that, dear," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her voice shaking. "I've dealt with people like her my whole life. I would have been fine." Sarah knelt beside the chair, looking up at the woman with fierce tenderness. "Well, you shouldn't have to deal with people like that. Not here. Not anywhere." She squeezed Mrs. Patterson's hand gently. "This is supposed to be a safe place. A kind place." The other customers in the shop began moving again, the spell broken. One woman approached the counter and paid for her flowers, pause and say, quietly, "That took courage. Good for you." Another customer nodded in agreement as he passed. But Sarah barely registered her support as she helped Mrs. Patterson to her feet and walked her slowly to the door, making sure she had her daisies and refusing to accept any payment. Her mind was racing through the consequences. Adriana Westfield, wife of a city councilman, the kind of woman who made phone calls that ruined lives. Sarah's boss didn't own this building. He leased it. One call to the landlord, one whisper complaint to the business bureau, and Mr. Peterson could lose everything. And it would be her fault. After Mrs. Patterson left, offering repeated thanks and blessings, Sarah found herself alone at the counter. The shop was momentarily empty of customers. She began mechanically res-tacking the scattered coins, her hands shaking so badly that several slipped through her fingers. "What did I just do?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "What did I just do?" That took courage. Sarah's head snapped up. She'd forgotten about the quiet man in the corner, the one who'd been browsing the orchids. He approached the counter now, holding a single white orchid in his hands. And for the first time, she really looked at him. He was in his mid-30s, dressed simply but expensively, the kind of clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. His face was kind, his eyes intelligent and observant. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested authority, though he wore it lightly. "That took stupidity," Sarah corrected him, her voice tight. "She's going to get me fired, maybe get my boss evicted, all because I couldn't keep my mouth shut." The man set the orchid gently on the counter. "Maybe, or maybe you just showed someone what real leadership looks like." Sarah looked at him, confused and exhausted. "I'm a florist. I don't know anything about leadership." He smiled slightly, a warmth entering his eyes. "Leadership isn't about titles or education. It's about character, about doing what's right even when it costs you something." He pulled out his wallet to pay for the orchid, but instead of handing her cash, he placed a business card on the counter alongside a crisp $100 bill. Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, the orchid is only $15. I can't." "Keep it," he said gently but firmly. "Consider it a tip for the most important thing I've seen all month." Sarah picked up the business card with trembling fingers. The embossed letters seemed to swim before her eyes. Marcus Chin, CEO, Chin Luxury Holdings. Her breath caught. She'd heard of Chin Luxury Holdings. Everyone had. It was a $340 million empire spanning hotels, restaurants, retail. And this man was... "My mother was right about you," Marcus said, his voice warm with something like pride. Sarah's mind reeled. "Your mother?" Marcus's smile widened. "She bought white orchids here 3 weeks ago. Anniversary flowers from my late father. She came home and wouldn't stop talking about the florist who treated her like family, who remembered details without being asked, who made her feel seen." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "I came to see if it was true." Sarah's throat tightened. She remembered that day, remembered the elegant elderly woman who'd shared stories about her husband while Sarah helped her choose the perfect arrangement. "If you ever want to work somewhere that values what you just did," Marcus continued, tapping the business card, "call me. I mean that." Before Sarah could find words to respond, before she could process any of this, he picked up his orchid and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. "What you did today. Most people talk about having integrity. You actually lived it. That's rare. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing alone in the empty shop, staring at a business card that felt impossibly heavy in her hand, wondering if her world had just ended or if it had just begun. Sarah's apartment was a tiny studio on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked half the time and the radiator clanged through the night. But it was hers. She'd made a home with second-hand furniture she'd refinished herself, plants crowding every available surface, and photographs of flowers she'd arranged over the years covering one entire wall. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It was stable. Tonight, sitting cross-legged on her worn couch with her laptop balanced on her knees, that stability felt frighteningly fragile. She'd spent the last hour researching Marcus Chun. Article after article painted the picture of a brilliant businessman who'd taken his family's modest importing company and transformed it into a luxury empire. Forbes profiles, business journal features, photographs of him at charity galas and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. $340 million. A penthouse in the city's most exclusive building. A reputation for being shrewd but fair. Sarah looked around her cramped apartment and laughed, a hollow, slightly hysterical sound. "Why would someone like him notice me?" she whispered to the empty room. His business card sat on her coffee table, impossibly crisp and white against the scratched surface. She'd picked it up and set it down at least 20 times since coming home. Each time, pride and desperation waged war in her chest. She didn't need charity. She didn't need rescue. She'd been taking care of herself since she was 16, working her way through community college, never asking anyone for handouts. The idea of calling a wealthy CEO because he felt sorry for her made her skin crawl. But then her phone rang, shattering the silence. Mr. Peterson's name flashed on the screen. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew before she answered what this call would be. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Sarah." Mr. Peterson's voice was heavy with something that sounded like grief. "I'm so sorry." Sarah closed her eyes, pressing her free hand against her forehead. "It's okay. I understand." "No, you don't understand." His voice cracked. "What you did today was right. That woman was cruel. And you defended someone who couldn't defend herself. You're the best employee I've ever had. The best person I know. But you can't afford to lose your lease," Sarah finished quietly. Adriana Westfield filed a formal complaint with the Business Bureau. "Her husband called my landlord, the man who owns this building. I got a call an hour ago. Either you go or I lose everything." The pain in his voice was palpable. "I have 3 other employees who depend on these jobs. I have a wife with medical bills. I can't sacrifice everyone for me," Sarah said. "I know. It's okay, Mr. Peterson. Really, you don't need to explain. This isn't fair. You did the right thing and you're being punished for it. That's not how the world should work." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Maybe not, but it's how the world does work." She took a shaky breath. "When do you need me to clear out my things?" "End of the week? I'll give you 2 weeks severance pay." "It's not enough, but it's all I can." "That's generous. Thank you." Sarah's voice was mechanical now, operating on autopilot. "I'll come by tomorrow to get my things." After she hung up, Sarah sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. The rent notice on her counter seemed to glow in her peripheral vision. $950 due in 10 days. $47 in her bank account. No job, no prospects. She picked up Marcus Chen's business card again, this time holding it between both hands, as if it were something precious and fragile. Or dangerous. "I can't believe I'm actually considering this," she whispered. But what choice did she have? Pride didn't pay rent. Independence didn't put food on the table. And maybe, just maybe, he'd meant what he said. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe it was actually an opportunity. Sarah picked up her phone. Marcus's number already pulled up on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button. One tap. That's all it would take. One moment of swallowing her pride, of admitting she needed help, of taking a leap into complete uncertainty. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's trembling hands, about the coins scattering across the counter, about Adriana Westfield's cruel, cutting voice. She thought about doing what was right even when it cost everything. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could freeze her fingers, Sarah pressed call. Sarah stood on the sidewalk outside Chin Luxury Holdings, staring up at the gleaming glass tower that seemed to pierce the clouds themselves. 42 floors of steel and ambition, reflecting the morning sun like a monument to everything she wasn't. When she called Marcus the night before, he'd answered on the second ring. His voice had been warm, genuinely pleased. "I was hoping you'd call," he'd said, as if he'd been waiting. As if her decision mattered to him. They'd arranged to meet this morning. And now here she was, feeling like an imposter in her simple dress and flats. The lobby took her breath away. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Men and women in perfectly tailored suits, moving with purposeful efficiency. Sarah looked down at her outfit, the nicest thing she owned, and suddenly felt invisible. Ms. Martinez? The receptionist's smile was genuine, kind. Mr. Chun is expecting you. 42nd floor. He'd told them her name. He'd been expecting her. The realization made something flutter nervously in Sarah's chest. The elevator ride felt eternal. She watched the floor numbers climb, each one taking her further from the world she knew and deeper into one she couldn't begin to understand. Her reflection in the polished walls showed a young woman who looked terrified, and she couldn't even pretend otherwise. When the doors opened, an assistant greeted her immediately. Ms. Martinez, welcome. Right this way, please. The executive floor was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the entire city. Sarah could see her neighborhood from here, small and distant, almost unreal. And then she was being ushered into a corner office where Marcus Chin stood waiting, his smile warm and his handshake firm. Thank you for coming, he said simply. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. Water is fine. I'm nervous enough already. His smile widened, and something about his genuine appreciation for her honesty made her shoulders relax just slightly. This was it. No turning back now. Marcus didn't retreat behind his massive desk. Instead, he gestured to two chairs positioned by the window, sitting across from Sarah's equals. The gesture wasn't lost on her. He was choosing to meet her on level ground. I'll be direct, Marcus began, his hands folded calmly in his lap. I wasn't in your shop by accident yesterday. Sarah nodded slowly. Your mother? She hasn't stopped talking about you for 3 weeks. His eyes held genuine warmth. But I needed to see for myself. I've been studying leadership character, what makes businesses truly succeed beyond profit margins. And I've realized something. I've been hiring wrong. He pulled up a presentation on a tablet, showing her data. Employee satisfaction scores trending downward. Customer complaints rising. Turnover rates climbing steadily. We're profitable, Marcus said quietly, but we're losing our soul. I've hired people with perfect resumes, impressive degrees, all the right credentials. But resumes don't show character. They don't reveal how someone treats people when no one important is watching. Sarah listened, her heart pounding. I want to create a new division, customer experience and culture. Eventually, I want you to lead it. He held up a hand before she could protest. But I'm not handing you anything. You'll start entry-level in customer service. $45,000 a year. You'll work your way up. 6 months to lead, 1 year to manager, 18 months to director at $85,000 plus benefits and equity. Sarah's breath caught. Why me? You could hire someone with an MBA, someone with actual experience. Because those people failed the test you passed. Marcus leaned forward, his voice intense. They talk about values in interviews. You live them when it costs you everything. That's what I need. That's what this company needs. Sarah stared at the career path document he'd handed her, her hands trembling. This is insane. I don't know anything about corporate culture or... You know how to treat people like they matter. Everything else can be taught. Sarah sat in her apartment that evening, Marcus's business card now accompanied by a formal offer letter. Her hands shook as she dialed his number. When he answered, she took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. Mr. Chen, this is Sarah Martinez. I want to accept your offer. His voice carried unmistakable warmth. I'm glad. You won't regret this. I hope you won't either, she whispered. After finalizing details, she would start Monday, 1 week from today. Sarah hung up and stared around her tiny apartment. A laugh escaped her lips, nervous and disbelieving and terrified all at once. What am I doing? She asked the empty room. But for the first time in days, she was smiling. Across the city, in a private booth at an upscale restaurant, Adriana Westfield slid a manila folder across the polished table toward Richard Moss. The journalist's face was carefully neutral as he glanced at the contents. Photographs of Sarah, Marcus's business card, Information about your luxury holdings. I need your help, Adriana said smoothly. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Adriana, I appreciate the lunch, but I'm not in the business of... Remember the plagiarism scandal 2 years ago? Adriana's voice dropped. Silky and dangerous. The one that nearly ended your career? My husband made calls. Called in favors. Got you that second chance you didn't deserve. Richard's jaw tightened. Now I'm calling it mine. Adriana tapped the folder. This florist humiliated me publicly. Now she's been hired by Chun Holdings. Suspicious timing, don't you think? I want you to write a story. Unqualified hire. Possible impropriety. Plant the doubt. Is any of that true? Adriana's smile was cold. Does it matter? You owe us, Richard. And debt always comes due. Richard stared at the folder for a long moment, his conscience warring with a survival instinct. Finally, his hand closed around it. I'll look into it. Adriana lifted her wine glass in mock salute. She embarrassed me in public. I'll return the favor. Only much, much bigger. Sarah arrived at Chun Holdings on her first day at 7:30 in the morning, a full 90 minutes before anyone else. She'd barely slept, running through scenarios in her mind, terrified of failing, desperate to prove she belonged. The customer service department occupied the 15th floor, rows of cubicles, the constant hum of phone conversations, the click of keyboards. Her team lead, Jessica, was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s who made no effort to hide her skepticism. You'll be handling basic customer inquiries, Jessica said, her tone professional but cool. Follow the script. Escalate anything complicated. Think you can manage that? Sarah nodded, ignoring the subtle condescension. I'll do my best. The whispers started almost immediately. Sarah heard fragments of conversations that stopped when she approached. CEO's favorite. Wonder what she did to get this job. Give it a week before she quits. But Sarah had spent 3 years dealing with difficult customers in a flower shop. She knew how to smile through discomfort, how to prove herself through action rather than words. By day 3, something shifted. A customer called, furious about a delayed order, threatening legal action. Sarah listened, really listened, the way she'd listened to countless customers at Bloom & Petal. She didn't interrupt, didn't offend, just let the anger run its course. Tell me what happened, she said gently when the shouting finally subsided. Help me understand so I can make this right. 20 minutes later, the customer hung up not just satisfied, but actually laughing, promising to leave a positive review. Jessica, who'd been monitoring the call, raised an eyebrow. For the first time, something like respect flickered in her eyes. By the end of week 1, the co-workers who'd been cold started inviting Sarah to lunch. One admitted quietly, "You're not what we expected," in a good way. Sarah smiled, finally feeling like she might actually belong here after all. 1 month later, Sarah arrived at the office feeling confident for the first time since she'd started. She'd found her rhythm, earned her team's respect, even begun to believe Marcus had been right about her potential. But the moment she stepped off the elevator, she knew something was wrong. People were staring at their phones, then at her, then quickly away. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she passed. The air felt thick with tension. Sarah pulled out her phone and saw the notification, a news alert from a major business journal. Her stomach dropped as she read the headline, Chun Holdings under fire, nepotism or worse? Richard Moss's article was brutal. It painted Sarah as an unqualified hire, implied a romantic relationship with Marcus, suggested preferential treatment and possible impropriety. The flower shop incident was mentioned but twisted, portrayed as unprofessional behavior toward a value customer. Social media had already exploded. Hashtags were trending. The comments were vicious. Sleeping her way to the top. Unqualified diversity hire. CEO's flavor of the month. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the hatred. Someone had left a printed copy of the article on her desk. An anonymous cruelty that made her eyes burn with unshed tears. She walked quickly to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and pressed her palms against her eyes. Every insecurity she'd ever felt came roaring back. They were right. She didn't belong here. She was a florist pretending to be something she wasn't. A knock on the bathroom door. Marcus's assistant's voice, gentle but urgent. "Sarah? Mr. Chen wants to see you." Sarah's stomach twisted. This was it. He was going to let her go, distance himself from the scandal. She couldn't blame him. When she entered his office, Marcus was furious. But not at her. "This is defamation. We're suing. I'm issuing a statement immediately." Sarah took a deep breath and said the words that would define everything that followed. "No, please don't." 3 months later, Sarah stood backstage at the company's quarterly all-hands meeting, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. 200 employees filled the conference hall beyond the curtain. Some still doubted her. Some had read the articles and believed them. This was her one chance to prove everyone wrong. Marcus finished presenting the quarterly results, then smiled. "Now I'd like to invite Sarah Martinez, our customer experience lead, to present her division's results." Surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd as Sarah walked to front. She'd been promoted, earned it through 4 months of relentless work. But many still questioned whether she deserved to be there. Sarah set up her presentation, took a deep breath, and decided to address the elephant in the room head-on. "For months ago, I was a florist," she began, her voice steady. "Some of you read articles questioning why I'm here. I can't control what people write, but I can control what I do." The room fell silent. She showed the metrics. Customer satisfaction up 34%, response times down 45%, retention up 28%, employee satisfaction in her division up 41%. But she didn't just show numbers. She showed video testimonials from customers whose lives had been touched by genuine care. "I learned something working in a flower shop," Sarah continued. "People remember how you make them feel. Every customer who walked through that door had a story. A birthday, an anniversary, an apology, a funeral. Business isn't just transactions. It's human moments." She showed her team's initiatives, listening first training, empathy workshops, empowered problem solving. "I didn't go to business school, but I learned something more valuable, how to see people, not just customers." Her final slide read simply, "Character isn't a luxury. It's the foundation." The room remained silent for one breathless moment. Then applause began, starting slow, building into a standing ovation that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. 6 months after her triumphant presentation, Sarah pulled up to Bloom and Petal in a modest but reliable car. Nothing flashy, but worlds away from the bus passes she relied on a year ago. The shop looked different now. Freshly painted, updated signage, new displays visible through the sparkling windows. But it still had its heart, that warmth that had made it special. The sign above the door now read, "Bloom and Petal, a Chun Community Ventures business." Sarah smiled as she entered. Mr. Peterson stood behind the counter, his face lighting up when he saw her. They embraced warmly, and he stepped back with pride in his eyes. "The director of customer experience graces us with her presence," he teased. Sarah laughed. "I'm still just a florist who got lucky." "Lucky?" Mr. Peterson shook his head firmly. "You earned every bit of that promotion. Sarah, never doubt that." Marcus had purchased the shop 6 months ago, keeping all the original staff and giving them raises. It was now the flagship of Chin Community Ventures, his new initiative supporting ethical businesses in underserved neighborhoods. Sarah led monthly workshops here, teaching other small business owners about empathy-based customer service. Today, 15 local entrepreneurs filled the back room, taking notes as Sarah shared stories from her flower shop days, connecting them to broader business principles. She watched their faces light up with recognition, with hope, with possibility. When the workshop ended, Marcus appeared at the door. He'd been sitting quietly in the back, watching her teach. He approached with a single white orchid in his hand. "You and these orchids," Sarah said, smiling. "Tradition," Marcus replied softly. "The first flower I ever bought from you." They walked to the neighborhood together, hands intertwined, a relationship that had grown slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect and shared values. Sarah had insisted they keep things professional at work, and Marcus had honored that completely. But here, away from the office, they were simply two people who'd found something rare. 10 months ago, I had $47 and no future, Sarah reflected. Marcus squeezed her hand. You always had a future. You just needed someone to see it. No, Sarah corrected gently. I needed to see it myself. You gave me the chance, but I had to believe I deserved it. They stopped at the small diner next to the flower shop, ordering coffee and sliding into a familiar booth. Marcus's expression turned playful. My mother wants to know when you're coming for Sunday dinner again. Sarah laughed. She asks me that every time I see her. That's because you're family now. The words made Sarah's eyes glisten. This girl who'd had nothing now had everything. Not because of money, but because of connection, purpose, and love. Did you hear about Adriana Westfield's husband? Sarah asked, her tone carefully neutral. He withdrew from the city council race. Marcus nodded. Ethics investigation. Turns out pressuring businesses for personal vendettas is frowned upon. When they traced the false article back to Adriana, his career couldn't survive the scandal. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I don't celebrate anyone's downfall, but I'm glad he can't hurt other small business owners anymore. That's the difference between you and them, Marcus said. You wanted justice, not revenge. Later, back at Chin Holdings, Sarah was arranging fresh flowers in the lobby, something she still did weekly, staying connected to her roots. A young woman sat nervously in the waiting area, clearly there for a job interview. Sarah noticed her anxiety and approached gently. First interview? The young woman nodded. I'm terrified. I don't have much experience. Sarah smiled and sat beside her. Can I tell you a secret? Neither did I when I started here. But sometimes the best qualification is just being genuinely yourself. Character counts more than credentials. The young woman's shoulders visibly relaxed. Thank you. I really needed to hear that. As Sarah watched her walk toward the elevators, Marcus appeared beside her, still saving the world one person at a time. Sarah leaned into him slightly. Someone did that for me once. Seems only fair to pass it on. Integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about who you are when you think no one cares. Sarah Martinez stood up when it cost her everything, when staying silent would have been easier, when keeping her head down would have been safer. She chose character over comfort, principle over paycheck, people over profit. And in doing so, she didn't just change her own life. She proved something the world desperately needs to remember, that kindness isn't weakness, that integrity isn't optional, that how we treat others, especially when they can't do anything for us, reveals everything about who we are. 10 months. That's all it took for Sarah's world to completely transform. But here's the truth. Sarah didn't change. The world finally saw what was always there. She'd always had courage. She'd always had heart. She'd always treated people with dignity and respect. She just needed someone to recognize that her character was worth more than any credential on paper. Marcus Chin didn't save Sarah. He simply gave her a platform to become who she was always meant to be. And Sarah? She proved that sometimes the biggest risk isn't taking a leap. It's staying exactly where you are when you know you're meant for something more. Sarah took the leap, and she soared. Today, Sarah Martinez is Vice President of Community Impact at Chin Luxury Holdings, overseeing 50 ethical business initiatives that have created over 1,200 jobs in underserved communities. Bloom and Petal has trained over 500 small business owners in empathy-based customer service. Mrs. Chin still gets her white orchids there every week. And Marcus? He's just happy his mother was right. Adriana Westfield declined to comment for this story. Richard Moss issued a public apology and now works for a nonprofit journalism organization, trying to restore the integrity he once compromised. But this story isn't really about any of them. It's about you. It's about the moments when you have to choose between doing what's easy and doing what's right. The moments when standing up costs you something. The moments when your character is tested, and no one would blame you for looking away. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's doubting themselves. Someone choosing between convenience and courage. Comment below, what would you have done in Sarah's shoes? And subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things through simple acts of kindness. Stories the world needs right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that character still matters.